and welcome back to the Hazzabhajan YouTube channel. It is Harry here, and today it is time for another really quirky stats-based video that you probably won't have considered at any point over the last few years or so, but for some reason I've decided to bring to you for no valid, I don't even know. A couple of weeks ago, I was perusing through my laptop's archives, as many people seem to do. Don't worry, there aren't any suspicious documents on there or anything like that. And I came across a spreadsheet that I made 5.5 years ago, documenting how many foreign players each team in Europe's top 5 leagues had, and what the subsequent percentage was of foreign players in those respective leagues as a whole. It took me a long time to make, since I had to go onto Wikipedia and calculate each and every team's percentages myself, when it turns out I literally could have just gone onto Transfermarkt and found out the stats directly and saved myself a lot of time, but it was still interesting to see nonetheless. However, it got me thinking what the comparison is with nowadays, and how much each team in league's foreign player quota has changed over the course of those 5.5 years since I first made that document. So I thought I'd gather the statistics for each team in Europe's top 5 leagues once more, using Transfermarkt this time, obviously, and see what the difference is. Now, admittedly, this is a little bit inexact, as the leagues have changed teams, obviously, since 2015, and I counted loan players in 2015, but not this year, but I really couldn't be bothered to check it through again, so I hope that this will suffice. Now, just as a point of reference, the first statistics were compiled in June 2015, when the promoted teams and relegated teams have been decided, so I'm including the teams who played in the 2015-16 season, but I didn't obviously take into account the transfers that would occur in the summer window of 2015, so disregard those if you will. And also for the 2020-21 quota, I'm calculating these basically just before the start of the January transfer window. So I hope that makes things a bit clearer, just in case there are any problems with how the data was going to work and stuff like that. So I thought I'd get that little bit of clarity out of the way, and without any further ado, let's have a look at how each of Europe's top 5 leagues has changed in terms of how many foreign players each one has. We'll start off with the league in the country that I call home, the Premier League. This is how the statistics looked in 2015, and as you can see, the top of this particular league is dominated by teams who actually finished much lower down in the league proper, with Norwich and Aston Villa both being relegated, Bournemouth finishing in 16th, and Everton slipping down to 11th. Of course, as you probably would have expected, the bigger teams have a much greater foreign player percentage, with Manchester City having just 7% of their first team squad being English, although this was obviously compiled before the likes of Fabian Delph and Raheem Sterling joined the club. The team who surprised me the most with regards to the Premier League was Stoke, who were in 19th in this fictional league that I've created, with just 19% of their players being English, despite being perhaps the most typically English side in the league at the time. Rugged and physical. Bear in mind, of course, Burnley had just been relegated. Now let's compare those statistics with how they look now, although it is worth noting, just to reiterate, that this was put together just before the January transfer window opened, so things may have changed by the time this video comes out, dependent on who makes transfers over the coming weeks. Although given the inactivity of teams in the January transfer market, I don't presume things are going to change that much. To be honest, the top 2 teams in this list did not surprise me in any way, given that Sheffield United have mostly the same squad from their Championship and League One stints, and Burnley have the perhaps disparaging label of Brexit Burnley. 6 of the Premier League's current top 9 sides are in the bottom 8 when it comes to English player percentages in their squad, with Man City once again finding themselves in a relegation spot, although they are narrowly ahead of newly promoted Fulham by virtue of where they finished in the league last season, and Wolves, who may as well now be called Lisbon. Interestingly, the overall percentage of English players at the end of the 2014-15 season was 36%, but 5.5 years on, that number has only increased by 1%, although there are a greater number of English youngsters coming through now, meaning that we might well be sort of a Brexit in terms of football. In terms of everything else though, I'm not quite so sure. Moving on to Ligue 1, and you can immediately see that there is a stark contrast between their individual teams' percentages and those of the EPL from 2015. Whilst only 4 Premier League sides had an English player count of 50% or over, France's top flight had 4 sides whose squads contained under 50% of French players, and surprisingly enough, one of them wasn't PSG, despite having been under Qatari ownership for 4 years by this point. Technically speaking, because Monaco aren't actually in France, their tally should be 0%, since there aren't any Monegasques playing for their team, but for the purposes of this video and for my sanity, I just included them as part of France anyway. Three tallies to take notice of going forward are Rennes on 47%, Lyon on 62%, and Normandy's finest outfit Caen on 69%, although admittedly the latter number is basically because of the number that it already is. When you compare it to now, there is still a majority of teams who have more French players than not, but only just, as that particular number has shrunk from 16 in 2015 to 11 nowadays, with the overall percentage falling from 58% of French players in 2015 to 51.5% in 2021. With the greater influx of foreign talent at their respective clubs as they challenge in both domestic and European competitions, PSG have dropped to just 32% of French players in their squad, albeit one of them is Kylian Mbappe, and Lyon have plummeted by a staggering 34% to just 28% of French talent within their squad, having flogged most of them, including the likes of Maxime Gonalons, Samuel Umtiti and Nabil Fekir, off to pastures new. However, Marseille for one team have stayed the exact same across that 5.5-year period, which I was quite surprised to see, and Rennes' greater focus on homegrown talent has clearly paid dividends, considering they finished in 3rd place last season, their highest ever league finish to date, and they now find themselves in 2nd place in this fictional league behind Stade Bressois 29. Moving over to Deutschland now, when we examine Germany's statistics closer, you can see that the teams who competed in the league in 2015 are actually quite congested when it comes to this criteria, barring two outliers, those being Darmstadt on 85% and Schalke on 63%. Every other team was stuck between a range of 44% and 56%, meaning that there were no teams who had very few German players in their squad. With the overall average taken into account, it came out with a count of 52% of players in Germany's Bundesliga hailing from a land which has given us the likes of Franz Beckenbauer, Matthias Sammer, Gerd Müller and Fritz Walter. 5 years though is a long time in football, as has been proven with how the German player count in the Bundesliga has changed drastically for the worse. Despite previously having a reputation of predominantly promoting homegrown talent, only 5 teams in the league currently have a rate of 50% or higher of German players in their squad, although as of the time of recording, they are quite spread out across the league. Union Berlin have just moved up to 4th, Köln are languishing down in 16th, Freiburg are perfectly set in mid-table in 8th, newly promoted Arminia Bielefeld are 1 place above Köln, and Werder Bremen, who only just survived by virtue of the relegation playoff last season, are in 13th as of the time of this recording. Out of all the other 13 teams, only 2 of them have a higher percentage of German players in their squad than Hannover 96, who were last back in 2015 on just 44%, with Hoffenheim even sinking as low as 29%, and unsurprisingly, the overall count of German players across the whole league has dropped to just 44%. Moving south to the beautiful country of Italy, their 2015 quota sees the highest individual percentage of any team thus far, with Carpi having a staggering 91% of Italian players in their squad at the time, although it clearly didn't do them any good as they were relegated in 18th place come the end of the season, albeit by just 1 point. Surprisingly enough, both Juventus and AC Milan, 2 giants of the Italian game, saw more than half of their players being Italian, and Internazionale, perhaps staying true to their name, have the rate of just 41%, although that is a considerable upgrade from what it was before. Whenever I loaded up a save of Foot Manager 2011 or 2012 or something like that, I can't remember exactly which one, they must have had like 3 or 4 Italian players in their squad at the absolute maximum, and only Marco Materazzi and Gianpaolo Pazzini were any good out of any of them. However, there were still 12 teams on a higher quota than 50%, whereas nowadays that number shrunk to just 4, and 3 of them are newly promoted sides in the forms of Benevento, Crotone and Spezia. Out of all the teams who competed in Serie A last season, only Genoa have more than 50% of their players hailing from their home country. Atalanta suffered the biggest fall from grace in this regard across all of Europe's top 5 leagues over the last 5.5 years, given that not only were they second in 2015, but Italians constituted a staggering 85% of their squad at the time, although in 5 years they now sit at just 33%. Udinese are clearly the most cosmopolitan club out of all of the teams in Italy's Serie A, given that their stat of just 22% of Italian players in 2015 has only increased by a measly 1% in the 5.5 years since, although Lazio have replaced them at the bottom of this particular league, with just over 1/5 of their players being Italian. No wonder the overall count has dropped from 54% in 2015 to 41% in 2021. When we head over to Spain, you'll notice that Athletic Bilbao have an extremely high rate of 97% of Spanish players in their squad, simply because of their Basque-only policy, meaning that all of their players have to have Basque heritage of some kind in order to play for the club. In case you're wondering, the only non-Spanish player in that team was current Manchester City defender Aymeric Laporte. Below them, 5 other teams had more than 80% of their players being Spanish in their squad, although all the big hitters such as Real Madrid, Barcelona, Atletico Madrid and Sevilla were all below that magical 50% mark. Barcelona's tally is quite surprising, considering most of their prior squads were built on Spanish graduates from La Masia, although this was a year after Jose Bartomeu took over as the club president, so clearly his disastrous reign at the Blaugrana was starting to take shape. Their particular rate hasn't changed much over the course of the last 5.5 years, only dropping by 3% to 43%, although Real Madrid has fallen by 14% to 33% and Atletico Madrid by 12% to just 26% of Spanish players in their squad to make them prop up this particular league, although they are top of the actual league at the moment, so I don't think they mind too much. Of course, Bilbao is still top of the tree on 96%, with their Basque rivals Real Sociedad slotting into second place and Osasuna in third. I'm pretty certain this sentence might sound a bit clunky, but I couldn't quite word it correctly, so you're going to have to try and bear with me on this one. But La Liga is in fact the only league to have more teams with a 50% or higher rate of their home nation's players this year than in 2015 out of the 5 surveyed, since 14 are above that milestone now compared to 13 5 years ago, although the overall percentage has dropped very slightly from 64% in 2015 to 62% nowadays, but it still makes them, by a country mile no less, the league with the most players from their own nation out of Europe's top 5 leagues. Well, that's all the stats I have for you, but if you take anything from this video, English players still hate going abroad but barely feature in their own league, Ligue 1 has become a much more global enterprise after the dominance of PSG, the Bundesliga is no longer the epicenter of players from their own nation prevalently featuring, if it was to begin with, which I'm pretty certain it was, Serie A is close to regaining its title as the most cosmopolitan league in the world, and Spain love to breed Spanish players into their top league. That just about concludes today's video on all the foreign player percentage quotas and all that kind of stuff in Europe's top 5 leagues, comparing 2015's data to nowadays. If you want me to see me do any more stats-based videos, then let me know which particular ones down in the comments below, and I'll try my best to give them a go and see what I can come up with. But leave a like if you did enjoy it, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you then.